Losing someone you love is always a very difficult process, especially if that person has become your life and your reason to live. Fortunately for most of us, we easily recover from dealing with that loss, but others, they have a hard time grasping that the person they love is no longer physically here. In this story, we talk about a grieving mother that buries herself with work just to forget about the pain. But one day, she notices a little boy at her dead daughter's grave. Every time she approaches the boy, he runs away. Who could it be, and why was a little boy alone at the cemetery? Matilda still could not grasp the idea that she had lost her daughter. Although it was to be expected, the thought of the loss was something that she still could not bear to accept. To her, it was as if the world was against her happiness and that she would have to suffer alone. Though when Stacy, her daughter, was born, the doctors had already tried to set her expectations that the child was going to have a bleak future. She was born already with heart defects, and this was something that Matilda just wanted to bet on. Matilda promised her baby that she was going to provide the future that she deserves, and in doing this, it would allow for her baby to live an almost normal life, despite the health challenges she faces every single day. Matilda and her husband were grateful that they get to spend every waking minute and hour and celebrate birthdays with Stacy. It was looking like the doctors were wrong with their diagnosis, and the couple just carried on with life as usual. However, as most would expect, giving the child the life she deserves does come with challenges and sacrifices that needed to be made. In order to provide for the endless hospital and doctor's appointments, Matilda needed to move away for work. She was employed as a corporal in the U.S. military, and it wasn't an easy job. Because of her situation, her superiors have found a way for her to avoid getting dispatched overseas. Even though she remained in the U.S., the base where she had to work at was a 10-hour drive away from home. Although Matilda was assigned locally, it was still a feat that she had to conquer, because she could not come home even when she wanted to. Fortunately for her, technology was already a thing, so it was easier to communicate and see her daughter even while she was away. She made sure that she would call as often as she possibly could so her daughter would feel as if she wasn't alone in her journey. It would especially break her heart so much when Joshua would take Stacy for regular health checks at the hospital and Stacy would call out crying for her. As Stacy was growing older, Joshua and Matilda decided to allow her to live her life like any child would. She attended school and Joshua would pick her up on the days that Matilda wasn't around. But their happiness as a normal family would soon be halted. Unfortunately, Stacy was fighting an inner battle and would soon be hospitalized. It was only a matter of days when she took a turn for the worst, and before anybody knew it, Stacy unfortunately lost the battle with her illness. It shocked their small community. It was all going so well, Matilda thought. So as soon as she heard the news about Stacy, even though her superiors were against it, she was still granted an indefinite leave as they knew that she needed to be with her daughter and then eventually cope with the loss. Matilda was with Stacy down to her very last breath, and it was the ultimate worst feeling as a mother to ever witness your child's health deteriorate and lose her battle. They held a very intimate funeral for little Stacy, but it was after the ceremony that was the hardest. We as humans cope differently when it comes to coping with the loss of someone that is dear to us. And unfortunately, while others may recover and accept the grief they feel, others are swallowed in and are not able to fully heal, thereby turning to other outlets. Matilda and Joshua both healed very differently from the loss. While Josh had come to terms with the fact that he lost his daughter too soon, Matilda, on the other hand, was having such a hard time that she instead buried herself in work to the point of exhaustion. Because Matilda was away for most of the time, Joshua had started to feel her indifference towards him. This then caused a rift between them, and both of them growing apart before they started to realize it. Unfortunately, there was only so much that he could take. While he tried to stay for the sake of their marriage, and him knowing that Matilda's cold demeanor was just a front to cope with the loss, he grew tired. He was a patient man, but he knew that he would not get the old Matilda back anytime soon, and so he left. Matilda's emotions were kept at bay for so long that when Joshua had left her, she was a complete wreck. Fast forward to 5 years later, she was still coping with the loss and suppressing her emotions that she had been more aloof now that she was alone. 3 years after she lost Stacy, Joshua had left her. Now, it was 5 years after her death, and her emotional and mental wounds are still fresh, like losing Stacy felt like it was just the day prior. As soon as she was discharged from the military, the first thing she wanted to do was sell the house. In that 5 years that she was trying to suppress feeling the loss, she has not ever visited Stacy's grave or even so much as looked at the cemetery every time she was home after being dispatched somewhere far away, but this was not to say that it did not break her heart. The guilt of not having to do enough to protect Stacy when she was alive was what was eating her up day and night. So every time that she was in town, she just passes by but she fails to look away. And every time she looks at where Stacy's grave is at, she sees something that she hasn't seen before. Every time that she would drive past the cemetery, she would see a little boy in front of Stacy's gravestone and her head was spinning with questions. Until one day, she decided to stop and approach the little boy and ask the questions that she's been wanting answered for a while. Every time that she would go near to the little boy, he would run away, fear clearly shown in his eyes. She did not want to run after him because she did not want to scare the boy. Within a matter of seconds, the boy would disappear from her line of sight, like he was a ghost or something, but that would be very impossible. For the first time in a long time, she'd stepped foot inside the cemetery and everything just felt so real. In that moment, she felt a pull and the next thing she knows, she was standing before Stacy's headstone and Matilda was brought to tears, and it felt like her heart was breaking once more. As soon as she got her emotions in check, she noticed something that wasn't there when they put her headstone in. Stacy's name was there, so was hers and her ex-husband's. But there was a name that she couldn't quite figure out. This puzzled her so much because she doesn't know who this was. Matilda thought long and hard about who the little boy was, but then it was like a light bulb moment for her when she reckoned that the name of the gravestone could possibly belong to the little boy. But then it begs even more questions that she already has. For a few days, she'd drive past the cemetery in hopes of seeing the little boy and actually getting to talk to him, but she didn't have much luck. Until on the seventh day, as she was driving by, she saw the little boy again. She immediately parked her car and walked towards him. Jimmy's name had already been on that headstone, but Matilda still wonders why. She doesn't have a child other than Stacy, and she was going to make sure she was going to get to the bottom of it. So when she approached the little boy and she saw him starting to dart, she shouted his name. Jimmy. It was all she had to say to make the little boy halt, and that was when she knew that she was right. The little boy turned to her with a look of surprise on his face. Matilda herself was shocked to find out that her suspicions were spot on. Matilda took advantage of the boy's stunned expression and slowly walked towards him, even closer this time, but she was careful not to scare him away. When she was close enough, she smiled at him endearingly. What a handsome young boy, she thought. He had similar eyes as Stacy's. How do you know my name? The boy asked. So Matilda smiled and pointed to the headstone. She had explained that she just put two and two together to figure out his name. She also mentioned that she was Stacy's mother, and the boy's eyes grew even wider. As soon as she said that she was Stacy's mother, Jimmy's eyes grew wide and even more shock and tears started welling up in his eyes. Matilda started to panic because her intention wasn't to scare the little boy, so she tried her best to help him calm down. Little Jimmy was not happy at all. That's not possible, he shouted. You're not my mother. As soon as he said those words, Matilda felt like she was stunned by lightning. How can that be? What's going on? Why was this little boy upset that she was Stacy's mother? Just when she was about to ask even more questions, a familiar voice answered. I think I have some explaining to do. Matilda looked back and she saw her ex-husband approach them. The little boy ran and jumped at him. Dad, who is this woman? She's not my mother. Stacy is my sister. Joshua's appearance was all she needed. She had not seen him in so long, and that would explain why Jimmy's name was added onto the headstone without her knowing. He was still family whether she liked it or not. So Joshua explained what happened shortly after their divorce. It had been so long since they last spoke and saw each other. All of this happening in one day was almost too much for her to bear, but she was already too far into the rounded hole. Might as well, she thought. So they talked for hours on end while Joshua was telling her what had happened. Shortly after their divorce, he had met someone and got her pregnant. They stayed together for quite some time before deciding to marry. Joshua didn't want to be the first to reach out as he knew that she still wasn't doing well, and he didn't want to open up wounds of the past. Now that that was all cleared up, Matilda thought that she could finally breathe. She didn't have proper closure, and she felt that this was what was needed to get her to start accepting and move on. Although the pain of losing Stacy is still as fresh, but at least now she's finally coming to terms with it. She and Joshua also agreed upon Jimmy's name being on the headstone. After all, he was still Stacy's brother, and he had all the right to visit his sister as often as he wants and needs. Finally, Matilda felt like this was only the beginning of her healing. It didn't matter if it took her 5 long years to realize it.